to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Pastor Steve Andrews.
Today we read about the allotment of the land of Manasseh in Joshua chapter 17. Then allotment was made to the people of Manasseh, for he was the firstborn of Joseph. To Machir, the firstborn of Manasseh, the father of Gilead, were allotted Gilead and Bashan, because he was a man of war. And allotments were made to the rest of the people of Manasseh by their clans, Abiezer, Helek, Azriel, Shechem, Hepher, and Shemida. These were the male descendants of Manasseh the son of Joseph by their clans. Now Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, had no sons but only daughters. And these are the names of his daughters: Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. They approached Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun and leaders and said, Yahweh commanded Moses to give us an inheritance along with our brothers. So according to the mouth of Yahweh he gave them an inheritance among the brothers of their father. Thus there fell to Manasseh 10 portions besides the land of Gilead and Bashan, which is on the other side of the Jordan, because the daughters of Manasseh received an inheritance along with his sons. The land of Gilead was allotted to the rest of the people of Manasseh. The territory of Manasseh reached from Asher to Michmethath, which is east of Shechem. Then the boundary goes along southward to the inhabitants of En-Tappuah. The land of Tappuah belonged to Manasseh, but the town of Tappuah on the boundary of Manasseh belonged to the people of Ephraim. Then the boundary went down to the brook Kanah. These cities to the south of the brook among the cities of Manasseh belonged to Ephraim. Then the boundary of Manasseh goes on the north side of the brook and ends at the sea. The land to the south being Ephraim's, and that to the north being Manasseh's, with the sea forming its boundary. On the north Asher is reached, and on the east Issachar. Also in Issachar and in Asher Manasseh had Beth-shean and its villages, and Iblaam and its villages, and the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, and the inhabitants of Endor and its villages, and the inhabitants of Tanakh and its villages, and the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages. The third is Naphath. Yet the people of Manasseh could not take possession of those cities, but the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in that land. Now when the people of Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not utterly drive them out. Then the people of Joseph spoke to Joshua, saying, Why have you given me but one lot and one portion as an inheritance, although I am a numerous people, since all along Yahweh has blessed me? Joshua said to them, If you are a numerous people, go up by yourselves to the forest, and there clear ground for yourselves in the land of the Perizzites and the Rephaim, since the hill country of Ephraim is too narrow for you. The people of Joseph said, The hill country is not enough for us, yet all the Canaanites who dwell in the plain have chariots of iron, both those in Beth-shean and its villages, and those in the valley of Jezreel. Then Joshua said to the house of Joseph, to Ephraim and Manasseh, You are a numerous people, and have great power. You shall not have one allotment only, but the hill country shall be yours. For though it is a forest, you shall clear it and possess it to its farthest borders. For you shall drive out the Canaanites, though they have chariots of iron, and though they are strong. This is the word of the Lord. So we've been going in order here, as we've seen the allotment given out, and again I would call your attention to, if you have the Lutheran Study Bible, page number 365, is where you'll find the map of the 12 tribes of Israel. Otherwise, just use your search engine on your computer or your phone, and you can pull up a map easily just by searching for Old Testament map, 12 tribes, Israel. That'll be good enough to bring up a solid map for you to consider with these chapters. Now, we've gone in order here. There's a priority, and so we can see Caleb came first as one of the 2 faithful spies. Joshua was the other. When Moses sent the 12 spies, one from each tribe, up into the promised land over 40 years earlier, Caleb gets that first inheritance because of that in the promised land. He's one of only 2 that got to actually go into it. And then Judah, as the one who is not actually firstborn of Israel, Jacob, but becomes that in a sense, and that Reuben, Simeon, and Levi have that family blessing taken away from them for various reasons, and Judah is the one through whom that family blessing is passed down. And then Joseph as the favorite son of Jacob, Israel. So you have Joseph getting split into two tribes at this point because Levi doesn't get an inheritance. The Levites are to be the priests. They are scattered around among the people, and Yahweh is their inheritance. So here instead, to keep the number at 12, Joseph is split into two as the favorite son. So he had two boys, two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh is actually the firstborn, but the blessing, unfortunately in Joseph's mind, was not given to Manasseh, but Jacob crossed hands and blessed Ephraim first instead of Manasseh. So Ephraim is listed first. We had that yesterday, and today we now get to Manasseh. When you get to chapter 18, the subtitle in my ESV text here is allotment of the remaining land. And you start to talk about the rest of the congregation. So these are the primary ones that are noted first. So Manasseh's inheritance in the promised land is actually going to be the second largest group, Judah being the only larger one of the bunch. We see mention of Gilead and Bashan. Those are actually east of the Jordan River, and this is what we observed back in chapter 13 a few days ago, that Manasseh has land both east of the Jordan and west of the Jordan. The half-tribe of Manasseh that settled east of it because they thought the land there was great, and then the half-tribe that'll settle to the west of the Jordan. So that eastern group is brought up again. Gilead and Bashan are to the east, basically from Moab, what was Moab, which is east of the sea, the Dead Sea or the Salt Sea. So from the northern part of the Dead Sea, moving forward up until you get to the Sea of Kinnereth, which is the Sea of Galilee in the New Testament and up to today. That's the region that we're describing here as Gilead. Bashan would be that spot to the east of the Sea of Kinnereth, there on the northern side. So that's in mind here. Now, we have mention of Zelophehad and his daughter specifically because he had no sons. The daughters had come before Moses and asked, what about their inheritance? What about their father's inheritance, since there were no sons born to him? Moses consulted with the Lord, and the Lord agreed that these daughters should have an inheritance in the land of Israel. And so he gave it to them, and you can read about that in Numbers chapter 27, verse 7. The listing of names of the daughters of Zelophehad, Noah probably stands out. So that's not obviously Noah from Noah's Ark in Genesis chapter 6 through 9. This is instead the name of a woman. And while it is true that in our own language, in English, we have names that are interchangeable, you might hear a name like Jesse, and you don't know if you're just off the surface referring to a man or a woman until you actually meet the person or come to know them. Well, this is not necessarily that, although they're both Noah in English. Noach is the Hebrew for Noah the man in Genesis, and really Noah is probably the best way to pronounce the name of the woman here in the Hebrew. So they aren't the same in Hebrew, but we've translated them into English as being the same. So that's just maybe a trivia note for you. But Tirzah, Milcah, those are actually names that we see elsewhere in Scripture as well. Noah, obviously the most common one because of the prominence of that story in the book of Genesis. Before we continue on with the next section, then, just a thought I had jotted down in my own notes for a conversation as a family. Since we're talking about all the land that God has given to his people, what land has God given to you? And how does God use you to care for that land, but also the reverse, which is more in line with what we're looking at here? How does God use the land to care for you? Those are interesting questions to ponder together as a family, and it might be something you've never really considered before, that the land that you live on is your land not in the sense of deeds and titles and banknotes and whatnot, mortgages, but that God has created us from the very beginning to be stewards, caretakers of his creation. And that piece of ground, whether it's tiny or massive, on which your family lives, the Lord has entrusted that piece of ground to you to care for. So how can you care for it? That when you plant a garden in your backyard, or when you mow the lawn, or when you prune your trees, or whatever it might be, you are fulfilling the description of Genesis chapter 1, that you would be a caretaker of God's creation. This is a good thing, and it's a gift that we can pass on to teach to our children because of that importance. The flip side of that question that I asked was also, how is God using the land to care for you? And it could be, especially if you're more of a farming family, or if you're involved in gardening or something, growing some food, that the Lord does do that, right? He feeds you from the land. This is good. Not every family can say that that's the case, and thankfully the Lord continues to feed them through other means, through other people who grow that food for them and provide it. But also, we can think of other ways that the Lord might use that land to provide for us and to care for us. And a primary one there might actually be the discipline that comes with caring for it. So as we steward, as we care for it, we are growing. The Lord is causing us to be more like him in caring for something that is not me, right? The sinful nature looks after number one. I'm good at looking after myself. But to look after someone else, to look after land, those things are more difficult. And so the Lord is shaping, forming, disciplining us as we do such things. So those might be good family conversations today. Then we read about the territory of Manasseh. And again, looking at the map is the easiest way to see this. As you look to the western side of the Jordan River, Manasseh is, it's going to start really from where you see the Jabbok River, and that comes off the east of the Jordan. But off of the east side of the Great Sea, or the Mediterranean Sea, you'll see the Kanah River. Manasseh starts there, and it moves northward until you get almost to the level of the Sea of Kinnereth, the bottom of it, at which point you're going to start getting into some of the other tribes. It's probably the best I can do at describing it to you over a podcast. Again, looking at a map is the way to go. But notice, the key here is going to be ultimately what comes in verse 12. And before we get to that, I just want to mention two other city names. Endor, which is probably most famous from Star Wars, not actually from the Bible, but it is in the Bible, right? This is a name of a city, and prominent in the Bible would actually be the story of the witch of Endor, as King Saul, in his fear of battle, goes to a practicer of witchcraft, a sorceress, who he had banned from his kingdom. He goes to her under disguise, pretending to not be the king, seeking her help, asking her to call back Samuel the prophet from the dead to speak with him. That's the account of the witch of Endor from 1 Samuel chapter 28. The other city I wanted to point out by name is Megiddo. Megiddo is important in terms of Old Testament and New Testament position. Megiddo is, it seems to be a central point on the world map, the global map, where various kingdoms, when they're coming against each other at this merger of multiple continents, they end up battling there. There are many battles at Megiddo, historically speaking, and this is New Testament prominent because of what we know of in English as Armageddon. Armageddon is actually a term that the New Testament borrows out of Hebrew, and it's not R, it's Har. It's got an H sound at the front of it, and that's the Hebrew word for a mountain. So it's the mountain of Megiddo that is referenced by the phrase Armageddon. The interesting part of that is that Megiddo isn't a mountain, it's a valley. And so we put these terms together as Armageddon, which we think of as the battle between God and the devil at the end of the world. Well, Megiddo is the place of many battles, and Har, mountain. So where is a mountain where God and the devil did battle against one another? Well, that would be the cross on Golgotha, right? Mount Calvary is a possible way to think of that text, that name from the book of Revelation, so famous in the church today. Regardless, it's a little offside here, but the word Megiddo brought that to mind for me today. Our key context at the end of the chapter, though, is verse 12. The people of Manasseh could not take possession of those cities. They're still allotted to them, right? God has given, starting at 11, Beth-shean, Iblaam, Dor, Endor, Tanak, Megiddo, Naphath. He's given these places to Manasseh, but the Manassites haven't taken them. They've left them in the possession of the Canaanites. And the reason for that is going to be the fear that they have of the Canaanites. And so you see the conversation starting at verse 14. They come to Joshua. The people of Joseph do. That would be a reference not just to Manasseh, but also to Ephraim. Ephraim lived right at the southern central point of Manasseh, if you look at the map there. And they're concerned that they haven't been given enough territory. We are numerous. I am a numerous people. Joshua's response, if you're a numerous people, go up by yourselves, clear ground for yourselves. And they won't do it. Why? All the Canaanites who dwell on the plain have chariots of iron. What's the real problem here is a family conversation point. The problem that they're identifying is there's not enough space for them. They haven't received enough. The problem that Joshua rightly identifies is that they're afraid, is that they do not trust the promise of God. And this is going to connect you. I mean, the end of the verse, right, the end of the chapter, you're going to clear it. You're going to drive out the Canaanites. You're going to do this even though they have chariots of iron, even though they are strong. God commanded Israel to drive out the Canaanites. You can see that in many places. I'll take you to Numbers chapter 33, verses 52 and 55. You shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you, and destroy all their figured stones, and destroy all their metal images, and demolish all their high places. Go into verse 55. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those of them whom you let remain shall be as barbs in your eyes and thorns in your side, and they shall trouble you in the land where you dwell. So the Lord's command, and also a warning to them of what happens if they don't. But that's not the only thing to consider here. The other part is, how did God say this was actually going to happen? And for that, we can go to several places. I'm going to take you first to Exodus chapter 23. This is verses, 28 to 30. Exodus 23, verses 28 through 30. This is God speaking, I will send hornets before you, which shall drive out the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites from before you. I will not drive them out before you in 1 year, lest the land become desolate and the wild beasts multiply against you. Little by little I will drive them out from before you, until you have increased and possessed the land. And then again in Deuteronomy chapter 9, this is Deuteronomy 9, verse 3, Know therefore today that he who goes over before you as a consuming fire is Yahweh your God. He will destroy them and subdue them before you. So you shall drive them out and make them perish quickly as Yahweh has promised you. Skipping 2 chapters ahead, Deuteronomy 11, verse 23, Yahweh will drive out all these nations before you, and you will dispossess nations greater and mightier than you. So not only are they rejecting God's command, but they are also, they're ignoring God's promise. They're ignoring the fact that it is the Lord who will fight for them. And they've even seen that, right? Going all the way back here, it's been several years as they've been doing this, as the Lord has been fighting for them, driving out the enemies and giving them this land. And they still struggle to believe it, even after all that time. We have those similar struggles in our lives that we receive the Lord's forgiveness, but the devil holds it holds our sin against us, causes us to continue to struggle and doubt. But Christ is victorious. Christ's promises for you are true and real, and there's nothing the devil can do to take them from you. I am a sinner. I admit it. But I'm forgiven by the blood of Jesus. Amen.